Heidi. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I celebrated 7 years, June 1st, 2016, and I'm from Findlay, Ohio.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for coming out and joining us. If you could start out by sharing a bit about your childhood.
Okay. So I was raised by my mom and grandma primarily. I met my father when I was 7 years old. We did a lot of moving around, so I moved probably about a half a dozen times from elementary into middle school. So it was always hard for me to just fit in, find a friend group. I went back and forth between my mom and my grandma's house often. My mom moved in with my grandma. So a lot of just like chaos, I think, a little bit growing up. Looking back, I definitely know my mom and grandma did the best of their ability. They had their own trauma they were working through, from their past. My first use was alcohol around the age of 13 and 14, and I just remember feeling like this is it. Like, this is it. This is where it's at. This is where I need to be. So my addiction progressed fairly quickly. During that time, I ended up in rehab at 16. So there's more shame. I went to inpatient rehab for 28 days. We really didn't talk about it as a family. Go to rehab, get the stuff taken care of, and let's get back on track. But for me, it began to be a way of life at a very young age. My high school career, I made it through the skin of my teeth. My mom and grandma were always very supportive. They were like, just keep going, do better. I hid the drugs and alcohol. After rehab, I got in trouble, ran away from home. My mom tried and tried and tried to be like, no, you can't do this. No, when she went to bed, I just jump out my window. I got my own apartment. And for the next few years, I was just really heavy, working in the nightclubs, using drugs. I started IV drugs now. So I went from the cocaine, I started the Oxycontins. This is back in 2001 when the pills were really, really big. Those got pretty expensive, like $1 per milligram as the years went up. So then I started dabbling with heroin. And then it was fairly quickly, I was hanging out with people that were using drugs IV, and somebody just taught me how to do it.
And how long were you an IV drug user?
So probably from the time I was 18 to 25, and then I stopped for a few years and got back into when I was 30.
Okay. And during, the 20s and into your 30s, any criminal justice involvement?
Yeah, lots of criminal justice involvement. I began selling drugs, and I worked at the Pittsburgh International Airport. So I worked as a coffee barista, and I was bringing heroin into the airport. This is right around when 9/11 happened, so they had extra security. So we started going through TSA, and I was going through the work area. And they normally never really messed with the work people. We just got to show our badge and go through. Well, they decided to randomly search people. So they pulled my purse, and when they opened my purse, there was a syringe in there. So they flagged me, and they asked what it was for, and I said I was a diabetic, and then they asked what medication I used, and I didn't have. I was like, well, shit. So I was strip searched, and I had about 10 folds of heroin on me. So that was my very first charge of trafficking heroin in the international airport. Because it was a first felony and I was a drug user, my lawyer helped me to kind of manipulate the system and say I'm on drugs, I need help, and I got treatment in lieu. Throughout that time, though, I, was still in the life. I did the bare minimum. I never fully got into recovery because I'm like, okay, this works here, I'll go to treatment here. I know when I have to take a drug test here. So I just got really good at manipulating the system. The relationship I was in at that time was very toxic. I got charged with accessory after the fact of armed bank robbery from that relationship.
Oh my.
Yeah. So you would think all of that going on, I would just step back. But I was really, really, really addicted to the lifestyle. I liked the part where the unknown happened. I'm an adrenaline junkie. So I liked that. I liked staying up all night, see what was popping in the streets. Like all of that stuff was exciting to me. No responsibilities. So once I got charged with that, my son's father, he went to the federal penitentiary. He got sentenced to 15 years. CPS came in and grabbed my child. So this is 2009. He was he was probably about 15 months old. So my mom, who, she'd always come through when things got too tough, she came down to Mississippi, got my child. I was in jail. And then throughout like that next year, I got out of jail within like 30, 60 days. So when I came back to Ohio, my mom let me stay with her, and I wasn't here but a week, and I was right back to the bars. So my mom kicked me out. She told me to take my child with me. She wasn't raising him. And I went back to the lifestyle.
So you got sober in 2015?
Yeah, my final, this recovery is June 1st, 2016.
Okay, 2016. So could you describe what life was like prior to June 1st? Those few years leading up to that. So right around that time, I found out I was pregnant again. So I went to Michigan because Ohio, there was no, that year, there was no like open abortion clinics. There was whatever was going on with the laws. So I went to Michigan, and I was 7 days past the limit where they could legally like abort. So they gave me adoption paperwork. I'm actively using drugs. The person that I was pregnant, I thought, could have either been somebody I was dating, either could have been a drug dealer, or was somebody that would pay me for sex. So the options were endless. There was really nothing to do. I mean, I had to have the baby. So I did get a hold of my mom, told her the situation, and she was just like, I don't know, just let me help with your son, that you currently have. So I did let her take my son. I signed temporary guardianship over to her that summer because he was going to begin school in her school district in September. So that whole summer, I mean, I just sold drugs, used drugs, pregnant. Anybody that was around me, it was normal. It was like normal for people to be pregnant using drugs, unfortunately. My plan was to go to the methadone clinic. I kept wanting to like do that, but I could never get there. You know what I mean? Yeah. Every day I woke up, I found a hustle, I figured something out. So like I could never get there. My next plan was when I had the baby to drop them off at a safe haven box. So I had like some plans. Everybody that was in my life at the time, drugs and the lifestyle were more important. It was just kind of overlooked that I was pregnant. My mom would call every once in a while and do a check-in, and I would put on a show for her and tell her I had a family picked out. They're going to adopt him. Everything's going good. The point, you know what I mean? I just sold her a dream, which I'm pretty sure she knew better. And then the time came where I was in labor. So it was like October 21st, 2015. I began labor at my house, and I kept having drugs delivered to me, cocaine and heroin. I don't think the cocaine was a good idea because I think it intensified the labor. I'm really not sure. I'm not a doctor, but just looking back. Yeah.
And my phone was broke at the time. I actually dropped it in the water that day during this process. So I was alone in my home, and I began giving birth. So I did not have a phone to call anybody. I remember feeling so shameful that I like ran around the house and shut all the windows because I didn't want anybody to hear me screaming. I was just like at a point where like I really didn't know what to do. But I think like you're just like in that fight or flight mode. So I gave birth to the baby in the bathtub. It was a very, very like powerful experience to just be like pulling a baby out of your vagina, like, and he was fine, like he seemed fine, I've watched enough Lifetime movies that I knew to cut the umbilical cord out. I knew to just like pull my placenta out, and I wrapped him up. I actually left his umbilical cord about this long because in my mind I had absolutely nothing. I didn't have a pamper, I didn't have a baby blanket, I didn't have a clothing, because even though I was pregnant, I wasn't like preparing for this. This is so sick to say, but every time I used drugs, there was a slimmer of hope that he would just stop moving. You know what I mean? I just really didn't know what to do. So I wrapped him up in one of my son's baby blankets that he had. And I think because the umbilical cord was so long, that's kind of what he fed off of. And then I continued to use drugs. And he laid on my couch for probably about 12, 15 hours before somebody that I sold drugs to that day had a little piece of their mind, because they called the police and was like, you know, this lady gave birth to a baby and it's laying on the couch. So the police and ambulance came to my house. I was flipped out. I mean, I was super high and I was like really, really flipped out. So I wouldn't let the police in my house, but they demanded the ambulance to come in because they needed to do a wellness check. They heard somebody birthed a baby. So when the ambulance came in, you know, I was very high at this moment, but looking through court records, like they observed like chaos. You know, I was very intoxicated and they said there was a baby that was alive, you know. So they took the baby to the hospital, and I tried to run from that situation. Like the hospital called and wanted to ask me like questions about health and stuff, and I just kept hanging up on them. CPS came to my house. I kept like shutting them out. Like I'm like, I just wanted to go away. Right. You know, like I wanted to not deal with it.
Right.
But unfortunately, that doesn't work. I remember doing so many drugs that I just did not want to have to deal with this situation. I'm like, I just want this to be done. It wasn't. Like, I mean, I had to face it. CPS got involved with my mom because she had my son because of the because of school records. They seen there was a child at that address, so CPS was really coming to make sure he was okay. And because I tried to just like numb the pain, shove the pain, I believe that baby was like just an eye-opening experience. You know, they always say like, okay, you hit your bottom, you hit your spot. I feel like there's really no bottom. Like we can keep going and going and going. Yep. I just feel like that opened a whole like aurora of like, what the F are you doing? Like what is happening? Yes. Like this is too much. So I gave the child up for adoption. I did like get my shit together. My mom kind of was like, come on, you gotta like, you cannot keep running from this. And I'm like, I cannot keep, like at that moment, I was like, I can't keep doing this. Like I got to the point where I was like, it's not fun anymore. I will say like in my teenage years, my early 20s, I had a lot of fun. You know, I had lots of fun, you know what I mean? Hustling in the streets, playing in the streets. But it just wasn't fun anymore. I was exhausted. Yes. I'm like, this is too much work for 10 minutes of feeling good.
Right.
Like it's not worth it. So I called my mom, and she was like, as soon as you walk in the door, I'm searching you. I'm taking your phone. We're going to do it my way. You know, and I'm like, listen, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. So I decided to get put on Vivitrol because I realized the cravings were pretty intense. So I tried the Vivitrol program, and I did that for about 6 months. But throughout the 6 months, I began going to Celebrate Recovery. I got pretty active in our church community. And I just started building a new life. You know, I took every suggestion. I think what really helped for me was I was placed in a program where everybody had a hurt, habit, or hang up. Not everybody necessarily had a drug problem. But the lady that her son died of a drug overdose, or the lady who was in the middle of a divorce, or the lady who had mental health issues, we all had the same feelings. You know what I mean? So I felt like I belong. Like, I'm like, okay, like, I'm not just like some junkie that should be thrown away, because I thought that for a long time. So those couple years, I began a great foundation with just my recovery. I started working in the field. I started as a peer support. It was very new, so we had to like get included with like counselors and case managers. So that was a couple years of being on the bottom of the barrel. Mm-hmm. I mean, I started off as a residential monitor working weekends. I had almost 2 years clean at this time, and I felt like I should have had a better job than that. I felt that I shouldn't have had to come in working weekends, second shift. But I did have some pretty solid people on my journey, and they said, Heidi, get in where you can fit in. Get in, begin the journey. And it was a matter of, I think, 6 months where I had a Monday through Friday peer support position, like 9 to 5. And then I moved into like a case manager position. And then we just got a very huge SAMHSA grant. And I stepped into the program director role because our executive director revamped a couple positions. I run today. You know what I mean? I keep going, I keep communicating, I keep trying to connect communities, building recovery, all that. So I feel like during my addiction, I've had some good qualities that I could use today in my recovery.
Could you share some inspiration and hope that spoke to you for somebody who's still struggling?
The hardest thing to do is to reach out, but do it. I mean, that's probably the hardest thing that I was able to do. But once you did, even that problem shared as a problem lessened. You know, that was really big for me. And then just reaching out, you know, because there's somebody that'll help. Like, and I'm not all for like even the past the recovery. Like, I'm not all for 100% abstinent. I mean, whatever. I'm all about harm reduction. So whatever you got to do to get your life better, like, just baby steps forward. You know, it's possible. I never thought in a million years I would be able to be sober, content in my life, coming to work, paying taxes. That was hard when you first started working and you thought you were getting this much money and you got this much money. I never thought that that would be realistic.
Yeah. You know what, those things like being able to pay taxes and not worry about the IRS coming after you, it feels good. Yeah, right, absolutely. Is there anything that we missed that you would like to talk about?
No.
Well, your story is one of redemption and, you know, really being able to put in the work and, you know, trying some things your own way, but really being able to find yourself. It's such a beautiful story of recovery. So thank you for being so open and honest about your path. It's definitely going to help somebody.
Sweet. Thank you.
Thank you.